But first, you've got a feel for senior members of the government grappling with how best to respond to the coronavirus crisis. You don't want people to panic, but you don't want them to be exposed to risk either. You don't want the economy to stall, but you don't want to add to fear with a stimulus that's too much, too soon or poorly targeted, like it was in the GFC when Kevin Rudd sent $900 cheques to dogs and dead people. And you've got to navigate between people's natural instinct to keep calm and carry on and their overly also natural instinct to overreact to any disease when so much is still unknown and where there is no vaccine. At what point do you ban travel from Italy, for example, now that they've had more than 7,000 cases of the virus and more than 300 deaths? And with the EU's open borders anyway, would it do any good? At what point do you ban large public gatherings, as the Italians did more than a fortnight ago? At what point do you order schools closed, as they've been closed in China for almost a month now and in Japan for the past week? When do you order large populations into a form of compulsory home isolation, the sort of lockdown that Hubei's 60 million residents have been in for nearly 6 weeks, and that's just been ordered for the 10 million Italians living in the northern region of Lombardy? Then there's the issue of when the immediate and proper attempts of containment can no longer add anything to the health response because the disease is endemic in the community, which means, of course, it's everywhere. But, of course, then what governments do or don't do beyond the physical can make the economic impact worse. There have always been two issues here. There's public safety, which must always come first, and then there's the economic impact of anything that causes large-scale disruption in travel, massive interference with supply chains and widespread interruptions to business with chronic absenteeism through disease or fear of disease. Luckily, due to actions many years ago, our government has had a well-developed pandemic plan for many years and a large stockpile of medicines. That doesn't make the tough decisions of the necessary balancing act any easier. Inevitably, people demand immediate action from the government. So the cry goes up, for instance, as it did last week, to ban panic buying, to give cash handouts to people who are quarantined, and to give interest-free loans to businesses impacted by the disease. But the government can't respond immediately to every new development. On one hand, every government measure then just adds to a sense of crisis. But on the other hand, often the first instinctive response will turn out to be the wrong one. So it's right for the government to be cautious and careful with its economic measures expected to be announced this week, but it can't let a sense of drift develop either, lest people blame the government for their problems rather than the pandemic. In crafting his economic response, two principles need to be kept in mind by the Treasurer. The first is that government cannot entirely shield anyone from the downsides of a crisis. Normal economic activity will inevitably be subdued for as long as people are focused on a potentially deadly new disease, and government cannot cover all of everyone's costs. If this pandemic continues to develop, the hit on the cash flow of households and their asset base is far more certain than it is that they'll catch the disease itself. The second, of course, is that bad policy doesn't become good policy just because the circumstances are extreme. The trouble with cash handouts is that they are so hard to withdraw and so easy to miss target. A good example here is that welfare recipients are still receiving the carbon tax compensation, even though the tax itself was scrapped 6 years ago because Labor, since then, has refused to vote the handouts away. That's why a better way to help the economy here would be to bring forward already legislated tax cuts and start to get new infrastructure spending underway, because that's just doing the right thing, only sooner. As I've said before, we're all lucky to have Greg Hunt as the Health Minister, as there's no one in federal parliament who's more on top of his portfolio than Hunt, but all ministers, particularly the Treasurer, now finalising his economic stimulus package at the same time as juggling his May budget, well, they'll all be tested over coming months. Indeed, this crisis will be a test of character for all of us. If you look at how some of us are handling it already in the aisles of our supermarkets across the country, I'd have to say it's a test some are failing. But of course, how we handle this disease is our best measure yet as to whether the resilience and the strength we've shown in the past as a nation is still fundamental to the Australia of our future.